Imagine boarding a plane, sitting down quietly with your book, and suddenly a woman stands up and demands, "You be removed, just because of your skin color." The cabin freezes, everyone's watching, and tension fills the air. But then, with one calm move, you reach into your jacket, and what you reveal leaves the entire plane in shock, and the woman who tried to shame you completely silent. The story begins on a bright and sunny afternoon at Atlanta International Airport, one of the busiest airports in the United States. Inside the massive terminal, the atmosphere was a mix of excitement and chaos. Families hurried through the long corridors with children dragging toy suitcases. Business travelers tapped away on their phones while sipping coffee, already preparing for meetings in New York. Tourists snapped photos, trying to capture the moment before boarding. Amid the crowd, people lined up for Flight 227, a routine trip to New York City. For most passengers, it was nothing more than another ordinary flight, a chance to get from one city to the next, some eager, some tired, and others simply looking forward to a quiet nap in the air. Among those boarding was a man named Marcus Williams. At first glance, Marcus looked like any other passenger. Tall, calm, and composed, he appeared to be in his late 30s. His style was simple: blue jeans, a casual jacket, and well-worn sneakers. Nothing about him screamed for attention. He carried only a small backpack slung over his shoulder and a paperback book in his hand, suggesting he was planning to pass the time reading. To the other passengers, he was just another traveler blending into the background. But Marcus was not who he seemed. Beneath that calm exterior was a man with years of training, discipline, and authority. He was a senior FBI agent traveling quietly for work. No flashy uniform, no loud announcements, no hints of his true identity. Just a man who preferred peace, silence, and anonymity. As Marcus walked down the jet bridge and entered the plane, he gave a polite nod to the flight attendants, then slipped into his assigned seat by the window. He placed his backpack neatly under the seat in front of him and opened his book, ready to disappear into its pages for the next couple of hours. Little did anyone know, this flight would soon become unforgettable. In just a matter of minutes, an ordinary journey would turn into a dramatic confrontation, one that would test Marcus's patience, reveal his true identity, and deliver a lesson no one on Flight 227 would ever forget. As Marcus settled comfortably into his seat by the window, flipping open his book, the sound of footsteps echoed in the narrow aisle. A woman in her mid-50s stopped abruptly near his row. She was hard to miss. Her hair was styled in a sharp blonde bob. Her coat was lined with fur, and pearls gleamed around her neck. Everything about her appearance screamed wealth and entitlement. Her name was Karen Miller, and in that instant, her expression soured as soon as her eyes landed on Marcus. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes narrowed, and she muttered something under her breath. At first, no one paid attention, but her whispers grew sharper, louder, and filled with irritation. "This is ridiculous," she hissed, shaking her head dramatically. "Why should I have to sit next to him? This is unsafe. Someone needs to do something." The words cut through the cabin like a blade. The passengers nearby froze. A man across the aisle looked up from his laptop, startled. A young woman clutching her baby shifted uncomfortably, hugging her child closer. Some stared at Karen in disbelief, their mouths slightly open as if they couldn't believe what they had just heard. Others dropped their gaze, staring at their phones or the floor, clearly embarrassed but unwilling to step into the conflict. Marcus, however, didn't react immediately. He kept his calm posture, his eyes still focused on his book, though he was very aware of the tension now radiating in the row. Karen, unsatisfied with the silence, scoffed loudly and made a show of adjusting her handbag. She turned slightly so that others could hear her. "You can't tell me this is safe," she continued, her voice dripping with arrogance. "I won't sit here. Not with him." Her tone carried a dangerous mix of fear and superiority. It wasn't just discomfort, it was accusation. And in an airplane cabin, where everyone is packed tightly together, those words carried weight. The tension grew heavier by the second. You could almost feel the air thicken as passengers waited to see what would happen next. A confrontation was brewing, and all eyes were now on Marcus and the woman who refused to hide her prejudice. Karen's frustration boiled over. She raised her manicured hand sharply, signaling for attention. A young flight attendant, busy helping another passenger with luggage, noticed her and hurried over. "Excuse me?" Karen said, her voice loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "I need this man removed. I don't feel comfortable sitting next to him." The flight attendant blinked, taken aback. For a moment, she thought she might have misheard. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Could you please explain the problem?" Karen folded her arms tightly across her chest, her pearl bracelet clinking as she did. Her face hardened with indignation. "Isn't it obvious?" she demanded. "Look at him!" "He's suspicious. For all I know, he could be dangerous. I am not flying on this plane unless you move him immediately." Her words dropped like a hammer. The entire cabin fell silent. A man who had been laughing at a text message froze mid-smile. A teenager pulling earbuds from his pocket stopped halfway. The hum of the air conditioning and the distant thud of luggage in the overhead bins were the only sounds that filled the tense silence. All eyes turned to Marcus. He looked up slowly from his book, his expression calm and composed, not giving away the storm that might have been brewing inside him. He studied Karen for a brief moment, then lowered his gaze back to the page without a word. His restraint made the scene even more powerful. The flight attendant shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Marcus, then back at Karen. She took a breath and spoke with professional firmness. "Ma'am, this passenger has a valid ticket for this seat. Unless there's a genuine issue, like a seating error or a safety concern, we cannot ask him to move." Karen's eyes widened with disbelief. She let out a dramatic gasp as if the flight attendant's words were an insult to her status. "So you're telling me that my concerns don't matter? That I, a paying customer, have to sit next to him?" She spat out the last word with disdain, making sure everyone could hear. The air grew heavier. People shifted in their seats. A few passengers shook their heads, while others whispered angrily under their breath. The tension had transformed the cabin into a stage, with Marcus and Karen unwilling stars in a drama no one had expected before takeoff. Instead of reacting with anger, Marcus calmly slid his bookmark into place and closed his book with deliberate ease. He looked at Karen with steady eyes, his voice low and even. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I assure you, I'm just here to take a quiet flight to New York. You have absolutely nothing to worry about." The way he spoke carried no hint of aggression. His tone was polite, controlled, and confident, so calm it almost disarmed the tension. It was the kind of response that many passengers didn't expect, given the hostility directed at him. But Karen wasn't satisfied. She let out a sharp laugh, shaking her head. "No, don't try to act innocent," she snapped, her voice rising loud enough to echo through the cabin. "I won't sit here. He should be checked. People like him always causing trouble. You never know what they're hiding." Her words carried venom, each one designed to feed into prejudice and fear. She leaned back slightly, folding her arms as if daring anyone to challenge her. A murmur spread through the rows. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances. A middle-aged man muttered angrily, "This is ridiculous." A young woman whispered to her friend, "Why is she making such a scene?" Others simply shook their heads, stunned that such behavior could erupt so openly on a public flight. The flight attendant stood frozen for a moment, clearly struggling to balance professionalism with the rising tension. She glanced at Marcus, silently impressed by his composure. Meanwhile, Marcus remained steady, his hands resting calmly on his lap. He didn't raise his voice, didn't argue, and didn't let anger dictate his actions. That quiet strength contrasted sharply with Karen's loud, erratic behavior. Karen, however, mistook his composure for weakness. She leaned toward the aisle, raising her voice even higher. "Why is nobody listening to me? What if he's hiding something? What if we're all in danger? You'll all regret ignoring me." The cabin grew tense, but this time the tide of opinion was turning. Passengers were no longer quietly avoiding the scene. They were beginning to take sides, and from the looks of it, most of them were siding with Marcus. It was only a matter of time before the situation reached its breaking point. At this point, the flight attendant shifted nervously, her eyes flicking between Karen's furious expression and Marcus's calm demeanor. She looked at Marcus almost apologetically, as if silently asking what to do next. The weight of the cabin's silence pressed down on everyone, and the tension was about to snap. Marcus sighed softly, as though he had hoped to avoid this moment. With slow, deliberate movements, he reached into his jacket. The passengers watched, breathless. Even Karen froze mid-rant, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. Then, with a steady hand, Marcus pulled out a black leather badge holder. He opened it with calm precision, and in the glow of the cabin lights, the words shimmered unmistakably. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Special Agent. The reaction was instant. A wave of gasps rippled through the plane. A child peered over his seat, whispering, "He's FBI!" A businessman in the aisle raised his eyebrows in shock. Conversations halted mid-sentence. As every passenger processed what they were seeing, Karen's face drained of color. The arrogance that had fueled her so confidently moments before evaporated in an instant. Her mouth opened as if to argue, but no sound came out. The pearls around her neck trembled slightly as her hands fidgeted in her lap. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but edged with unmistakable authority. "Ma'am, you wanted me checked? Well, here's the truth. You just tried to have an FBI agent removed from a flight because of the color of his skin." The words landed heavier than thunder. They weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. The quiet strength in his tone carried more weight than anger ever could. Around them, passengers shifted, their expressions a mix of awe and satisfaction. Some shook their heads in disgust at Karen, while others looked at Marcus with newfound respect. Karen swallowed hard, her confidence completely shattered. She looked down at her lap, avoiding his gaze, her earlier bravado crumbling into silence. The flight attendant exhaled with visible relief, standing straighter now that the truth was revealed. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Marcus was no longer the quiet man being accused. He was the authority in the room, and everyone knew it. The plane, once filled with tension, now buzzed with whispered disbelief. And for Karen Miller, there was no escape from the humiliation of being exposed. For a moment, the cabin was frozen in silence. You could hear the faint hum of the aircraft's engines and the soft rustle of air from the overhead vents. Dozens of passengers sat in stunned disbelief, eyes darting between Marcus's badge and Karen's flushed face. Karen's cheeks turned crimson, her lips trembling as if she wanted to speak, but no words would come. The confidence she had worn like armor just minutes earlier was gone. Now she sat exposed, her arrogance crumbling under the weight of the truth. Then the silence broke. A single pair of hands began clapping from the back of the plane. Within seconds, the sound grew louder as more passengers joined in. Applause echoed through the cabin, filling the tense space with an unexpected wave of support. Some passengers even let out cheers. A man across the aisle leaned forward and said loudly, "That's what you get." His voice carried the satisfaction everyone seemed to feel. A young woman near the front nodded firmly, whispering to her seatmate. Finally, someone stood up to her. Marcus didn't bask in the praise. He simply gave a polite nod and tucked his badge back into his jacket. His calm demeanor never wavered, even as the cabin celebrated the quiet dignity with which he had handled the entire ordeal. The flight attendant, who had looked moments ago as if she were walking on eggshells, now smiled with clear relief. She straightened her posture, her voice stronger and more confident. "Agent Williams, thank you," she said respectfully before turning toward Karen. "And ma'am, please take your seat. We will not tolerate this behavior any further." Karen's eyes darted around the cabin, but everywhere she looked, she saw disapproval. Strangers who once avoided eye contact now stared at her with judgment. With her pride shattered, she lowered herself into the seat beside Marcus. Her hands clenched tightly around her handbag. Her eyes glued themselves to the floor, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. The applause slowly faded, but the energy in the cabin had changed. Tension was replaced with a collective sense of justice. Passengers settled back into their seats, whispering excitedly about what they had just witnessed. And in the middle of it all sat Marcus, quiet, composed, and stronger than ever. The rest of the flight unfolded in a calm, almost surreal quiet. After the chaos of the confrontation, the cabin felt lighter, as if a storm had finally passed. Marcus, true to his nature, didn't seek the spotlight. He simply reopened his book, turned to the page he had marked, and continued reading as though nothing extraordinary had taken place. His composure only deepened the respect others felt for him. Karen, on the other hand, sat rigidly in her seat. She didn't speak another word for the remainder of the flight. Her eyes stayed fixed on the floor or the seat back in front of her, her earlier arrogance replaced by a silence thick with humiliation. Every so often she shifted uncomfortably, but she never dared to look at Marcus or at the passengers who had witnessed her outburst. Whispers rippled softly across the rows. Passengers leaned toward each other, retelling the moment in hushed but excited voices. "Did you see her face when he showed the badge?" one man murmured. "I'll never forget that," said another. For many, it wasn't just a confrontation. It was a lesson, a moment they knew they'd carry long after the plane touched down. As the hours passed and the plane began its descent into New York, the story had already started to spread. Travelers who had recorded bits of the incident whispered about sharing it online, while others simply promised to tell their families as soon as they landed. The humiliation of one passenger had transformed into an unforgettable lesson for everyone aboard. When the wheels finally touched the runway, the passengers applauded the safe landing. But behind the clapping lingered a sense of shared experience. This wasn't just another flight anymore, it was a story about dignity, respect and justice taking flight in the face of prejudice. For those who witnessed it, the message was crystal clear. Judging someone by their skin, color can backfire in the most unexpected way. Hate and arrogance may try to rise, but truth and respect will always soar higher. And as the passengers filed out into the bustling terminal, one thought stayed with them all. What began as a moment of cruelty had ended as a powerful reminder that equality and respect are the wings that truly carry us forward. And that moment reminded everyone on that flight of one. Powerful truth. Respect will always rise, higher than hate. If this story moved you, make sure to hit that like button. Share it with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that will leave you speechless.